You did not grow up thinking you were a cat person. Maybe you were neutral on cats. Maybe you actively preferred dogs or didn't want pets at all, or just never thought much about it. And then something happened. A cat arrived through adoption, through a friend, through some casual arrangement that didn't feel like a big decision at the time, and somewhere between the first week and the third month, something shifted in you that you did not see coming. And now you are a person who talks to a cat, who watches a cat sleep and feels something that is difficult to name but is definitely real, who has at some point rearranged your schedule for a cat or canceled something or stayed home just because the cat seemed like it needed company. And when you try to explain this to someone who doesn't have a cat, you can hear yourself and you know how it sounds. But you also know that you are not exaggerating. You know that what you feel is real and that the feeling is larger than you initially thought it would be. That is what this video is about. Not about cats being cute. Not about why the internet loves them. About what is actually happening inside a specific kind of person when a cat becomes significant to them. Because there is a psychology here. A real one. And the people it describes are usually not who you'd expect. If something about that introduction already sounds like your life, I want you to drop a comment below and tell me the exact moment you realized this cat had gotten to you. The specific moment it shifted. Because those moments are different for everyone, and sometimes one person's story in the comments is the exact thing that helps someone else feel less alone or less embarrassed about how much they care. Your comment might become the next video. So tell me. Let's start with something that seems simple but isn't. Why do people fall for cats harder than they anticipated, and why is it so often the people who didn't expect to? There is a concept in developmental psychology called the Baby Schema. The term was coined by an ethologist named Konrad Lorenz, and the plain English version is this: the human brain has a specific neurological response to certain physical proportions. Large eyes relative to face size, a rounded forehead, a small nose, soft, slightly uncoordinated features. These proportions trigger a caregiving response in the human brain that is almost automatic. It is the same response activated by human infants. The brain sees those features, and something in the subcortical circuitry, the old, deep, ancient part of the brain that doesn't run on logic, responds with a pull toward protection, toward nurturing, toward closeness. Cats, anatomically, map almost perfectly onto the Baby Schema. Their eyes are disproportionately large. Their faces are round and flat relative to their bodies. Their features cluster in the center of their face in a way that is structurally similar to a human infant's face. This is not a coincidence in terms of the brain's response. Your brain is not confused about whether the cat is a baby. But the neurological pathway that activates when you look at a cat is the same pathway that was designed to make you care for something small, something dependent, something that needs you. And once that pathway is activated, not theoretically, but in real daily contact, in the actual presence of a real animal, it does not distinguish between species. It just runs. It just does what it was built to do. This is why people who thought they were neutral on cats find themselves deeply attached within months. The pathway was always there. The cat just activated it, and activation in neuroscience is not a subtle process. Once a caregiving pathway is running, it generates real emotion, real attachment, real distress when the object of the attachment is absent or distressed. The feeling is genuine because the neurological mechanism is genuine. You are not being dramatic. You are experiencing exactly what your brain was designed to experience. You just weren't expecting the cat to be the thing that triggered it. But here's where it gets more interesting. Because the Baby Schema explains why most people respond positively to cats in a general way. It doesn't explain why certain people bond with cats as deeply as they do. Why some people feel something closer to genuine companionship, to mutual understanding, to a relationship with genuine weight. For that, we have to look at something different. There is a concept in psychology called secure attachment style, and its counterpart, anxious or avoidant attachment. Attachment theory, in plain English, is the study of how people form close bonds with other people, with caregivers, with partners, and what shapes the pattern of those bonds. A person with a secure attachment style generally finds relationships comfortable. They can be close without fear of abandonment. They can be alone without fear of disconnection. They move between closeness and independence without a lot of internal friction. But a person with an anxious or avoidant attachment style, and many people carry one of these without knowing it, experiences relationships with more complexity. An anxiously attached person craves closeness, but also fears it won't last, fears they'll need too much, fears the inevitable moment when the other person pulls away. An avoidantly attached person has learned to protect themselves from that possibility by keeping emotional distance as a default, by never fully arriving in a relationship, by keeping one foot out the door before the door can be closed on them. Here is what cats do for both of these attachment styles, and it is genuinely remarkable once you see it clearly. For the anxiously attached person, a cat offers something that human relationships rarely do: consistent, unconditional presence that makes no emotional demands. The cat does not assess your neediness. The cat does not have moods that require careful management. The cat does not pull away because you need too much, and it does not make you feel guilty for wanting closeness. The relationship with a cat does not require the constant, subtle negotiation of human relationships, the reading of cues about whether this is a good moment or a bad one, the worry about whether you are too much or not enough. The cat simply is. And for a nervous system that has spent years monitoring the emotional weather of human relationships with anxious precision, the uncomplicated presence of a cat is not a small thing. It is profound rest. For the avoidantly attached person, the dynamic is different but equally powerful. The cat does not push for closeness. The cat does not require emotional vulnerability on a schedule. The cat does not feel rejected if you need space. And paradoxically, exactly because the cat is not pressing, not demanding, not pursuing, the avoidantly attached person begins to move toward it. The closeness arrives not because it was required, but because it was safe. And for a person who has spent their life protecting themselves from the risk of closeness, discovering a relationship where closeness arrives without risk is often the first time they understand what closeness actually feels like. The cat teaches the avoidant person that warmth does not have to be dangerous. That proximity does not have to be a trap. This is why so many people describe their cat relationships as easier than their human ones. Not because they love the cat more than the people in their lives, but because the cat relationship operates outside the survival patterns they've built around human intimacy. It is a relationship that bypasses the defense system, and what they feel inside it is not filtered through years of learned protection. It arrives clean. Now let's talk about something that almost nobody names when they talk about why they love their cat, but that is operating underneath everything else. Cats communicate differently from humans. This is obvious, but the implication of that difference is less obvious than it seems. Cats communicate primarily through body language, through the position of the ears, the angle of the tail, the diameter of the pupil, the speed of the blink, the orientation of the whiskers, the specific sound of a particular vocalization. None of this is verbal, none of it is explicit. All of it requires observation, attention, a willingness to learn a nonverbal language through experience rather than instruction. Most people cannot read cat communication at all. They see a cat's behavior and interpret it through a human lens or a dog lens and get it wrong. They misread the slow tail movement. They don't notice the ear position. They miss the difference between a trill and a chirp and a specific kind of meow that means something completely different from any other meow. They cannot decode what they are not paying attention to. But some people can, and the people who bond most deeply with cats are almost always the people who, without being taught to do so, began paying attention to those signals and learning to read them. They noticed, they watched, they compared. They built, over weeks and months, a working vocabulary for what the specific animal was communicating in each specific moment. And that process, the process of learning a nonverbal language, is not a generic skill. It is a skill that exists in specific kinds of people. People who are highly attuned to nonverbal communication in humans. People who notice the thing someone didn't say, the shift in tone, the small tension in a person's posture that contradicts the words coming out of their mouth. People who navigate the emotional landscape of a room by reading it rather than talking through it. People who have spent a significant portion of their lives developing a sensitivity to what is communicated beneath the explicit. These are often the people who found human communication frustrating in childhood. Not because they were bad at it, because they were paying attention to a layer of it that most people weren't acknowledging. They could see the gap between what was said and what was meant. And that gap was confusing, sometimes painful, often isolating. Because if you can see that people don't always mean what they say, and you don't know how to talk about that, and no one around you seems to notice it as clearly as you do, you grow up feeling slightly on the outside of social experience. Not excluded, necessarily, just not quite synchronized. And then a cat, and suddenly there is a relationship that is entirely nonverbal, that rewards exactly the skill they've spent their whole life developing, that is honest in a way that human communication often is not. The cat cannot lie. The cat's body language is not managing your feelings or performing a social role. The cat is simply expressing its actual state in real time with complete transparency. And for someone who has spent years learning to read the difference between performance and reality in human behavior, a creature that is always, only, genuinely itself is something close to a revelation. There is a reason the people who love cats most deeply are often described by themselves and others as highly perceptive, as emotionally intelligent, as slightly exhausted by social situations that other people seem to navigate effortlessly, as people who feel things more strongly than they show, as people who need more recovery time after social interaction than seems normal. These are not random coincidences in personality. They are the signature of a specific neurological profile. And the cat is not just a pet for this kind of person. It is, in a very real sense, the relationship that fits how they're actually built. Let's talk about that neurological profile more precisely, because understanding it changes the way you see yourself. There is a concept called sensory processing sensitivity, identified by psychologist Elaine Aron in the 1990s, and the plain English version is this: some people's nervous systems process incoming information, sensory, emotional, interpersonal, more deeply and thoroughly than average. Not more emotionally, more thoroughly. They take in more detail, they notice more. They process what they notice more extensively before forming a response. Their threshold for stimulation is lower, which means they reach saturation, the feeling of having taken in too much, more quickly than most people do. This is not a disorder. It is not anxiety, though it can look like anxiety from the outside. It is a genuine variation in how the nervous system handles input, and it is more common than most people realize. Researchers estimate it appears in roughly 15 to 20% of the population. It also appears across many animal species, which suggests it is an evolutionarily selected trait, not a malfunction. People with high sensory processing sensitivity tend to feel overwhelmed by environments with a lot of competing stimulation. Loud spaces, crowded rooms, rapid-fire conversation. The emotional residue of a difficult interaction that lingers long after the interaction has ended. They tend to be highly conscientious, highly empathetic, highly aware of subtlety and nuance. They tend to need more time alone to decompress from social experience. They tend to feel things deeply and integrate experiences more slowly than people who process less intensely. They also consistently form unusually deep bonds with animals, and particularly with cats. Here is why. The sensory processing sensitive person has a nervous system that is already running a complex, high-volume program. Relationships with other people, even good relationships, even relationships they value and want, add load to that system. Because human relationships require constant reading, constant calibration, constant responsiveness to another person's complex, variable, often unpredictable emotional state. For a nervous system that is already processing everything at full intensity, another person's full emotional presence is a lot. Not unwanted, but a lot. A cat is also a lot, emotionally, for the person who is truly paying attention. But the cat's lot is steady. It is consistent. It does not have days where it is performing fine, but actually carrying a deep distress that you can feel but cannot access. It does not require you to manage how it perceives you. It does not have needs that conflict with yours in the complex, negotiated way that human relationships require. The cat's emotional presence is real and deep and sometimes demanding, but it is also simpler, more honest, more contained. For a highly sensitive nervous system, the cat relationship is not a substitution for human connection. It is a form of deep connection that does not cost what human connection costs. And for a person who spends a lot of their life managing the cost of being fully present in human relationships, that is not a small thing. It is rest, real rest. The kind that doesn't require any part of the system to go offline. The kind where you can be completely present and not pay for it afterward. Now let's talk about something I want to be careful about, because it gets misread easily. Some people, when they describe their cat relationships, feel a quiet embarrassment. As if caring this much about an animal is a sign of something socially insufficient. As if the depth of what they feel for the cat is somehow in competition with what they feel for the people in their lives, and that one of those things says something unflattering about the other. I want to be very direct here. The depth of what you feel for your cat is not evidence that you are bad at human relationships. In most cases, it is evidence of exactly the opposite. The same capacity for deep attention, nonverbal attunement, patient observation, and genuine emotional responsiveness that you bring to the cat relationship is the same capacity you bring to your human relationships. You are not a person who can only connect with cats. You are a person who connects deeply. And the cat happened to be a relationship that let you experience the full depth of that capacity without the complexity that human relationships sometimes layer over it. The cat did not teach you to care. You already knew how. The cat just gave you a space where the caring could arrive without defense, without management, without the negotiations that are inevitable in human intimacy. And in doing so, the cat showed you something about yourself, about the depth you're capable of, about the quality of presence you can offer, about the specificity of attention you bring to a relationship when you feel safe enough to bring it fully. That is not a small thing to learn. That is, in fact, one of the more important things a person can come to understand about themselves. Let's talk about the mere exposure effect, because it explains something specific about the trajectory of these relationships. The mere exposure effect, in plain English, means that familiarity alone creates preference. The more you are exposed to something, the more positively you tend to feel toward it, even if the exposure itself is completely passive. Psychologist Robert Zajonc demonstrated this repeatedly across different contexts, faces, sounds, words, images. Simple repeated contact, without any positive or negative experience attached, shifts the emotional valence in a positive direction. With cats, this effect runs in combination with the baby schema activation, the attachment dynamic, and the developing nonverbal vocabulary, and the result is a compounding accumulation of positive association that the person often doesn't notice happening in real time. Each day, without any specific dramatic moment, the attachment deepens. The cat's presence becomes part of the background of what feels normal, what feels right, what feels like home. And then at some point, the point you might describe as when it hit you, the accumulation becomes visible. You look at the cat and you feel the weight of months of quiet deepening all at once. It feels sudden. But it wasn't sudden. It was slow, steady, and invisible until the moment it wasn't. This is also why losing a cat is so often more painful than the person expected. Not just because death is always painful, but because the depth of what was built quietly over months or years was never fully visible to the person while it was building. The loss makes the size of the attachment legible for the first time, and the size surprises them. It is large, larger than they felt they had permission to feel. And they grieve in a particular kind of complicated way, deeply, genuinely, while also feeling obscurely embarrassed about the depth of it, as if they need to justify the size of their grief to themselves. You don't. The size of the grief is simply the size of the love, and the size of the love is simply the size of what was actually there. Nothing was exaggerated. Nothing was misplaced. What was there was real, and what is gone is real, and the pain is exactly proportionate to the truth of it. Now I want to bring in something that connects everything we've talked about into a single, clear frame. Because I think the psychology of people who love cats more than they expected is actually pointing at something much larger than cats. There is a specific kind of person who moves through the world slightly differently from the majority, not dramatically differently, not in a way that is visible most of the time. But underneath the ordinary surface of their life, something is running at a different frequency. They notice more. They feel more. They process longer. They need more quiet. They form attachment slowly and then completely. They are intensely loyal to the people and things they genuinely care about. They find it easier to be honest with animals than with most people, because animals receive honesty without complication. They have a high tolerance for being alone, but a low tolerance for feeling unseen. They would rather have one or two deep connections than a wide social landscape of surface ones. This is the person the cat finds. Not because cats can identify them by sight, but because the depth of attention this person brings to the cat relationship is exactly what allows the relationship to become what it becomes. A different person, bringing less attention, would have a different relationship with the same cat. The cat would be fine, but the resonance would not be there. The mutual recognition would not develop. The specific, quiet language between two beings who are paying complete attention to each other would not form. The cat does not prefer this kind of person, but this kind of person creates the conditions for something real to happen. And the cat, being a creature that responds to genuine attention in a way that is very honest, that purrs when it is genuinely content, that seeks contact when it genuinely wants it, that retreats when it genuinely needs space, gives this person something back that is rare in their experience. A relationship where what is offered is received, and what is given in return is real. Not performed, not managed, real. This is what the person who loves their cat more than they expected is actually responding to. Not just the softness of the fur, not just the entertainment value, not just the warmth of a body in the room. The reality of the response. The confirmation that what they offered, their attention, their care, their presence, was registered by another living being and responded to genuinely. For a person who sometimes wonders, quietly, whether they are too much or not enough for the people around them, the cat's honest response is not a small thing. It is confirmation. It is proof. You are not too much. You are exactly right. At least for this one small creature. At least in this one quiet room, what you bring is not excessive or unusual or something that needs to be dialed back. It is welcomed. It is received. It is enough. Now here is the self-talk script I want to offer you. Because I think some people who watch this carry a quiet embarrassment about the size of what they feel for their cat, and that embarrassment is worth addressing directly, in your own head, in your own voice. When someone makes a joke about cat people, or gives you a look when you mention your cat's specific personality or your specific feelings about your cat, or when you yourself feel the impulse to downplay how much you care, try something like this, in whatever words sound like you. The way I feel about this animal is not a quirk, and it is not a compensation for something missing. It is evidence of a capacity I have, a capacity for depth, for attention, for genuine connection. I did not expect to feel this much. But I also did not expect to learn this much about myself from a relationship I thought would be simple. The cat is not a substitute for human connection. The cat is where I learned that I was capable of more connection than I had let myself show. That is not something to be embarrassed about. That is something to understand. You don't have to say it out loud. You don't have to say it to anyone else. But saying it to yourself, really letting it land, is the beginning of treating the depth of what you feel as information about who you are rather than as something slightly awkward to manage around other people. Because here is the thing, the person who didn't expect to love their cat this much is usually the person who didn't expect to be the kind of person who loves anything this much. They underestimated their own capacity. Not out of low self-esteem, out of a lifetime of learning to keep that capacity quiet, contained, manageable. And the cat, with complete indifference to all of that learned containment, arrived and was simply itself, and asked for attention, and received attention, and gave something honest back, and in doing so, revealed you to yourself. That is not a small thing to receive from a cat. That is actually one of the larger things another living being can offer. The reflection of a capacity you didn't know you had, held in a small, warm body, looking back at you with disproportionately large eyes. If this video put into words something you've been feeling but couldn't articulate, leave a comment. Tell me about the moment you knew the cat had changed something. Tell me about the specific thing your cat does that you've never been able to explain to anyone who doesn't get it. Because the specificity matters. And those stories are the ones that build the next video. And if something in what we talked about today, the sensory processing sensitivity, the attachment patterns, the feeling of being slightly out of frequency with the people around you, felt like more than just cat psychology, felt like something about who you are more broadly, there is a video that goes directly into that. It's about why some people feel things more deeply than their environment seems to know what to do with, and what that depth actually is, and where it comes from, and why it is not a problem to be solved. It is right there whenever you're ready for it. The cat already knew. Now you do too.